these arpeggios are actually a little easier than it might seem. I want to help you improve your classical guitar arpeggio skills and learn this really cool piece along the way. I really love this study because it's a really good way to practice your chops, but it's also really expressive and fun to play. We'll analyze some form, context, and theory, and we'll break it down into small muscle memory chunks, and then we'll put them back together. And I want to share an approach that was really helpful when I first started working on my classical technique. And I think this approach will help your arpeggios feel much more natural and fluent. And let's start with that right now. The pattern that we're trying to play is this P-I-M-A-M-I. And it kind of looks like how it sounds, rolling up and down. The lowest and highest notes mark the beginning and midpoint of each beat. The main thing I want to get for now is that at the beginning of each beat, we want to do a full plant. And then for the last two notes, we're going to plant sequentially. So we plant P-I-M-A on whatever strings their next notes are on. We play our thumb note, I-M-A are still down. Then we play our index finger note, but the other two fingers are still planted. Then we play M, and now we only have A still planted, and then finally A plays, and we're briefly floating in the air above the strings. For the last two notes, we're still going to plant before we play the note. So we're going to put our middle finger down nice and early, and then we're going to play that note, and then we'll plant our I finger on its string, and then we'll play that note. And then at the beginning of the next beat, we're going to do a full plant again, and then we repeat the pattern. The faster you want to play something usually means the slower you should practice it. But you also need to sometimes just go for it. With this pattern, part of it is that it is just this sort of like little wave pattern with your fingers. Now, just a little thing about speed is, if I just play my thumb and ring finger notes, it's not really that fast, and none of your other fingers are really moving much faster than that. So sometimes just try to do the pattern fast and just see what's falling apart. And then when you identify what isn't working, that's what you should work on going slowly. Let me give you a good way to improve your rhythmic accuracy, which is to try accenting different notes. In the final piece, we're going to accent the lowest and the highest notes. So we should practice that first. And the other way I want to accent this is in groups of two instead of groups of three. And so in that case, we're going to accent our thumb note and our middle finger note on the way up and on the way down. I think if you practice those two different accent patterns at a slow speed, that will start to make it feel a lot more even. And then you'll just automatically be able to do it faster. And let's just think about this planting idea for a second. Because when we plant, we stop the vibration of the strings. And so we're kind of creating a little rest at the beginning of each measure as we play the bass note. And when we look at the original score, there is a rest there. So it kind of seems like he's hinting that we should plant anyways. It's from a collection of studies, and this is pretty clearly an arpeggio study. But it's worth pointing out it doesn't really seem to be like a dance or something with a simple melody or jaunty rhythm. I think it's a little bit more like a prelude. It says allegro, so quickly, but it doesn't say as quickly as humanly possible. We're in common time or 4/4 time. Each beat is divided into a sextuplet. So each beat is one arpeggio pattern. Now to focus on our other hand, let's take out the arpeggio and condense this piece down into block chords. We'll look at each chord and how it connects to the next. These decrescendos are kind of interesting. And so we can just play them. But I think there's kind of a cool thing here, which is basically, why are they there? And so I think it's because of this pedal. The concept of having a pedal tone comes from organ music. On an organ, you just get essentially infinite sustain. But on guitar, our notes decay. Once we play the bass note, it already is going to decrescendo on its own. And so if we continue to play the high notes at the same volume, they will seem to pop out in front of the bass note. Think of taking the high notes and fitting them into the decay of the low notes. And this will heighten the illusion that our bass note is sustaining. The sort of usual thing that we get, especially with music for students, would be phrases in groups of 4 or 8 or 16 bars. And so just starting at the very end, this last chord would be at the place where the next group of 4 bars would start, if that makes sense. Before that, we have the 4-bar coda. The reason it's a coda is because we really already had the last cadence, and this is essentially just the E minor arpeggio, and I think it's supposed to be a sort of dramatic flourish at the end. And so the 4 measures before that have the final cadence, and this nice harmonic progression that leads up to the cadence, and this really kind of cool melody hiding in the upper voice of the arpeggio. So I'm going to call this the cadential section. Before that, we have this 4-measure section that I'm going to call the interlude, because it's very different than the previous section, and it's kind of different than the next section. And also, I think it sounds very bright. You can almost just see it by looking at the score. There's all these sharps, which just make me feel like it's going to sound brighter. And this is kind of like an unexpected major chord, well, a dominant 7th chord actually. And so for a moment, I think we forget about the tonality of this piece. So it's almost like we could be in E major. But then when we get the C natural again, it's like reality setting back in, that we're headed back to minor. Maybe you can sense my analysis is getting more and more shaky as we move back. But let's keep going. The reason I've been avoiding this first section is because it's kind of an unusual 6 bars long. So that's another reason why I feel like this is sort of like a prelude, because preludes often have a more improvisatory approach to composition. At one point, it was quite in vogue to practice hundreds of arpeggio studies. But I think that many people would agree that there's sort of a core group of arpeggio patterns that you should master first. And so I feel like for me, the top three are P-I-M-A, P-A-M-I, and then this one, P-I-M-A-M-I. And so we can use this arpeggio study to practice those patterns as well. So if I have this P-I-M-A pattern, then I can kind of see how P and M go, and then put the other fingers back in.